Hello, I'm W.T. Edmondson, and welcome to Focus. Freedom often causes unbelievable silence. Of course, the aim of Focus is to inform, educate, and motivate our citizens to action. We have with us Captain Rger Whittler with the Missouri Highway Patrol, Captain Gary Hill, Chief Gary Hill, Lincoln University Police Department, and Lieutenant David Williams with the JC Police Department. Welcome to Focus.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're going to start out here. We first want to allow you the opportunity to share with us why you entered law enforcement. What was that driving factor that led you to law enforcement?
Oh, for me, it was, at the end of the day, I wanted my life, when I die and I stand before God, I wanted my life to mean something. I wanted to be able to say I helped people, and I didn't waste the life that I was given. So it allows me to be able to make a positive change in the community, and I'm able to see, things that I do immediately. It's that instant gratification for being able to help people and see what I've done today. So it's been for me, it's definitely being able to make that change and see the change that I've been able to make in my community.
Yeah, for me, I enjoy working with people. So it was one of the first careers that I thought of doing was to be in a position that I was outside and I was working with people. I enjoyed the physical aspects of law enforcement, so it was always a dream for me to be able to go out and to move around rather than to be confined to an office. So that's my reason for choosing law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was probably more around a role model. I wanted to be able to say that my children had somebody to look up to and have a good, strong base to go on, because when we do retire, we want to be able to have people we can count on to do the right things, and in order to do that, you have to be in a position to kind of guide them down that road. And I had some good people mentor me when I was young. It was either military or policing, and I got as close to the military as I could in this. I still dress in the almost same uniform style. We're very similar, and I think the role model aspect for me was why I chose this.
Okay. Well, you guys place your life in harm's way every day you walk out of your house. What are some of the things that when you first got into law enforcement, what were some of your thoughts about harm's way?
Well, I think for me, the first thing, my background started in narcotics. I was an undercover narcotics officer, so for me it was different than once I became a uniformed officer, because then it was truly more time than not I was by myself with one or two other undercover officers. So there was a lot of potentially dangerous opportunities, but for me, just worrying about going home and seeing the wife and my kids, that's what the focus for me every day. Whether it's leaving the house or leaving work, we try to make sure that we teach our young officers, head on a swivel. You have to be paying attention to what's going on around you.
For me, I thought about the danger a lot when I started the job. Actually, my mother, when I told her that I wanted to be a highway patrol officer, she said, "I wish you would, think of something else that's not so dangerous." But then she supported me after I told her that this is what I wanted to do. Throughout my career, I can say that I've had times when, I started my shift, especially the night shifts. Always, I would pray, and I would sometimes have, thoughts that something could happen, but I always just went forward knowing that I had a spirit and I was trained well, and I felt like, I could handle whatever I encountered. So,
Well, for me, it was a little bit different. For a point in time there, I was a single father with my daughter. It was just me and my daughter, and I worked for Cole County at the time. So there were times for me to where I was the only deputy on the road from 6 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock in the morning. And there have been a couple of times where, because of harm, I've almost quit. decided to hang it up because if something was to happen to me, my daughter's going to be at home. You know, at that time she was around 10, between 9 and 10. I was going to orphan her, you know, because of some stupid call that I went on to that turned into a domestic that turned into something else. Or there's just been several times to where I thought about hanging it up because I didn't want to orphan my kid at that point in time. And things tend to work out, and after it's over, I decided to, you know, if I don't do it, who will? And, you know, even now, she's 23 now, and she appreciates that and understands that. But because of all the dangers out there, kind of like everybody else up here, my family is what made me almost want to give it up.
All righty. Well, thank you for that. And you ought to be applauded for taking this important role. A lot of folk don't want that, and we appreciate the job that you all do to serve and protect. Well, I invite you during this interview to, first of all, be candid, not to hold anything back, to share your true feelings, your opinions, and positions. And I'm sure in some question that you may answer, you may be answering them based on your position with your agency, and in some, it would just be your opinion. So I'd like to share that with the audience to let them know that in each of your answers, it may be representing the department, and may be just what you're thinking and your opinions. So let's get into our questions. If you could list a few, looking back over the last few years, law enforcement has been in the public eye for some situations that I'm sure law enforcement as a whole was not very proud of. Has there been an increase in shooting of black unarmed men, or is it the result of camera phones where it's simply being captured? Whereas before, if the media did not cover it, then it wasn't heard about.
I guess we're going to start with me with that question. I believe that the invention of the camera phone and a lot more cameras out there have caught things that people have been complaining about for years. We know that the history of the United States is one in which, with slavery, the Jim Crow laws, and black codes and things like that, to where law enforcement hasn't always been a friend to the African American community. But with that being said, we know that we shouldn't really be surprised when we see a lot of instances that occur between white cops and black cops, white cops and black people. When those incidents occur, we shouldn't be surprised at that, because you have to look at it in the sense of this. Still today, law enforcement is still a predominantly white profession. So we do see a lot of it, especially in the African American communities, where those communities are sometimes, because of the low economic status, are policed harsher than some of the other communities. So you'll see things like that. And it's one of the things where we have to look at everything. When we look at the United States as a whole, what's happening in South Dakota, what's happening in North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, I can tell you that the African American population up there is not large. It's not a big one. So you have to look at those numbers and look at what's actually going on. Now, some of the things that the cameras are catching, people need to understand, and I talk to people about this all the time. Good cops hate when bad cops do stupid stuff. We don't like it. We hate it. And the reason being is some of them, especially one that just happened in Atlanta, where the guy was pulled out of the car and they punched him in the face, and then they kicked him in the face when he was laying on the ground. While those cops are at home on administrative leave or looking for other jobs, we're still out here having to deal with the mess that they just caused. We're still having to deal with the tension that's put on now the population against us, because they think all of us are doing that kind of stuff, and we're not. We're not. When we see something that's not right, we report it. And there's a lot of the reporting things that are going on, and I don't think that most people understand that the Department of Public Safety investigates officers every year, roughly around 1,200 investigations for doing things just like that, revoking police officers' licenses, filing charges, things like that. And a lot of people don't know that the Department of Public Safety does that and conducts those type of investigations from reports from us and reports from the community. I do believe that a lot of the incidents that have happened between white cops and African American males, where I'm happy that it's being caught. I'm happy that, you know, it's being seen. But remember, there's 900,000 of us policing 300 million people. Today in Cole County, you can go to any jail in the state of Missouri and see how many people they're arrested and see how many instances of use of force there were between those arrests. We bring in probably about 50, 60 people a day in Cole County Jail, and we don't have any instances. So I'd ask people to look at those statistics, not just the one that they see on TV when it comes to judging us on how we do our job, but look at the statistics with any jail. How many people are arrested every day versus the incidence of use of force?
And when it comes to that question, you know, I look at that question as something that's based on an individual case. Each shooting, each officer and you know, perpetrator or suspect, whatever that person's title, that's an individual case, and how it happened are unique circumstances to that case. What we've seen is that society has become more violent. I mean, in a lot of black neighborhoods, there's more crime that creates a more hostile environment in general, because you have murders that are occurring on a daily basis in some of our metropolitan areas. St. Louis is trying to fight a murder rate that just continues to seem to present itself as a challenge in the black community. So we have to look at each case, I think, on an individual basis, but we also have to look at the big picture and say there's just a lot of shootings and a lot of murders that are going on, and how many of those instances are officers running into those people who are potentially lethal to our officers, which puts the officers on a heightened level of alert. So yeah, there's just that split second that we get to make a choice. And I remember back in 1991, I stopped an individual, and he was carrying a load of drugs on Interstate 44 west of Springfield. And as I asked him to exit the car, he turned and he pushed me with his elbow and knocked me off of the highway onto the shoulder down kind of an embankment. And as he approached, I pulled my revolver, and I thought at that time, if he has a gun, I have to shoot him before he can shoot me. He's already assaulted me, but he didn't have a gun, and I made that choice not to shoot, and he was able to get in his car and flee. But we only have that split second to make that choice, and each situation is so unique that it makes it hard to compile all these cases and say that we've got a systemic, you know, problem that police officers shooting black citizens. That's how I would look at the whole picture.
Lieutenant?
Probably the thing that I would want to point out first is the communication and lack thereof. One of the things that the chief said earlier is we know more than anyone else like a bad person to be among us. I think one of the things that people often forget is, in order to be a profession, and that's what we call ourselves professionals. And in order to do that, all others have a mechanism in place. You look at doctors, you look at nurses, all other professions have mechanisms in place to report their own. And we report our own, but they don't make it to the situation where it's limelighted. People don't know how we handle our problems. And when we don't find out about a problem, it makes the media. By no means am I going to look at every situation. There are bad police officers out there. We know that. We try very hard, not just from looking at the interaction to black citizens, but also interactions to other black officers. Because one of the things that we all share in common is we get it from multiple directions. One of the things that people often see us and they think, well, you're either with us or against us. And it's not that at all. I'm trying to do the job that I took the oath to do. And sometimes that means that I have to look at an officer, whether it be my department, another department, and literally say, that is not representing me. And it sometimes takes a video to get that out. I have mentioned it many times before in speeches and discussion forums. The biggest thing I see is that people want to find the bad things. If we reported all the good things that we did, we would look like we're trying to toot our own horn. What we don't do is we don't do a good enough job of explaining the good things that we do. Programs like this kind of help with that, because what we do in our individual departments, we have Operation Toys, we have Citizens Police Academies. We do things to try to make people understand that we are trying. And the majority of the time when something bad happens, it eliminates 100, 200, 300 good things that nobody ever knew we did. So I think the communication side of it is we have to be able to tell people we understand that there are bad police officers out there. There are bad police officers out there shooting whites, blacks, Hispanics, but when the media wants to play the spin, it's always the white officer shooting a black officer, or a black citizen. When in fact, I think if someone is doing wrong and it means something should be done, we've been given that authority to do something. Sometimes it just happens to be white against black or black against white. We don't hear the reports of black officers shooting white citizens because that doesn't sell the way that a black officer shooting another black will. We only hear that when it's enough critical to where we can say, look what happened.
Have there been an increase in the number of shooting of police by blacks, or is it reported more in light of the climate, the tense climate?
It's definitely the climate, because right now that's what's making news. As Lieutenant Williams said, you know, if the news wants to, they have a job to do. They have a job to gather the attention of the people who watch their news, and that's what's going to make the news. As far as people shooting us and shooting at us, I can't count the times I've been shot at. Cannot count the times, especially in the county. Everyone has a gun out there in the county. You know,
A couple of them we've been together.
some of them we've been together. Traveling down 94 at 100 miles an hour, getting shot at. You know, but that kind of stuff doesn't make the news. You know, it's our job to be shot at. A lot of people see it's our job to take those risks and things like that. So that's not really news. Now, when we do it on the other end, I just feel like, you know, things just flip flop. We have a lot of things that go on in our little county, and I think by and large, between the Highway Patrol, JCPD, Cole County, Lincoln, Capitol Police, we got a pretty good handle on it. And we can't stop everything because our crystal ball gets cloudy every now and then. We can't see what's going to happen, but we have enough going on here to where we can say things are kind of like Captain Whittler said. Things are kind of picked up overall. The violence in society. So that would be my answer. Definitely, the violence in society, period, has picked up.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, when it comes to the number of assaults on officers, the number of, you know, deadly force situations where officers are, you know, the target of someone, those incidents, they don't stay the same year after year, but we've tried to put in some emphasis through the Federal Department of Justice that we and other organizations. We want to try to keep the number of officers killed below 100, and we've not been able to reach that goal because it keeps each year going over that below 100 standard that we've tried to reach, and that's, you know, that's really, we would like to have the standard 0 officers killed in the line of duty. But we have to be realistic, and we're trying to shoot for 100. But as an agency and as a profession, we've seen the attacks on officers that have been ambushes. We've seen officers shot while they were having lunch. They weren't actually performing any enforcement activity and didn't anticipate having contact with anyone while they were having lunch, and they were actually ambushed and snuck up upon. So that has created a different environment for us, because previously all of our incidents where we were attacked, our use of force was normally while we were making arrests, while we were doing investigations, but now it just comes out of nowhere. So it makes the number inapplicable. It just makes the environment more threatening with that new component of where you don't know where it's coming from. It's not the guy that you're investigating, it's someone who's driving down the street that has a vendetta against an officer.
That most of the time they don't know about. One of the things I think is we as a society allow violence to play a bigger role than it ever did. I can remember growing up and the violence was not there with guns. Even, I'll date myself, but even in the 80s, we had all the dangerous TV shows that there were. A-Team. How many rounds were shot on the A-Team and no one was killed? But now people are so accustomed to, instead of talking through their problem or fist fighting through their problems, now my avenue is violence by gun. And with that same society shift, our younger officers don't have the experience to deal with people knowing that they could be potentially threatening them. One of the things we used to teach our officers are stop and approach. We teach officers how to approach a car and look for signs as they get up there that could be that one alert that should have seen them, no bad things are about to happen. Well, now with the way cameras are, you have to look at every person in there because someone's recording you as you approach. And there are just as many bad guys out there right now training other bad guys on how we do tactics. And so I think
Cameras again.
we have to realize that the society as a whole is more violent. We have to teach our officers the potential is there more, and just accept the fact that there are bad people that want to do bad things to us when we don't even know it.
Reverting back, as you sitting in your living room and you're watching TV and you see one of these shootings, what is the first thought?
The first thought normally is, did someone die? The second thought is, how can I take from that and teach my officers how not to be that next story? More than not, my wife and kids can tell you I talk to the TV a lot, but it's because I'm trying to get something to where I can give to my officers. They will tell you, if you were to interview any of the younger officers at the department, I have told them for years, don't put me in a position of having to knock on the door to explain to your loved one that you slipped, something bad happened. So I look at that TV and I go, what happened? Did anyone die? How can I get something from this to give to one of my guys to where they are not the next episode? That's the first thing I do.
Yeah.
But when I see it, I have several different thoughts go through my mind. I think, well, is there some type of mental illness, or is there some type of judgment decision that was made that caused someone to die over what was the conflict? And so when we see these cases where there are traffic stops and the person jumps out and shoots at the officer and the officer shoots back and the suspect is hit or so forth, then I automatically think, well, they must have been running from a warrant for murder or something, because there's got to be more than the traffic stop that was at stake. So that's what I normally do, is I think about all of the different reasons, ideas behind this, and I kind of suspend my judgment and think, well, I hope that we get to hear what the investigation is, because there's so many cases where we never, unless you follow the story, you never, there's so many, you don't hear the final evidence in the case. But a lot of them you do hear that the person was either wanted on a much more serious charge, or that person was ill, on drugs, suffering from mental capacity concerns, or you know, they wanted to commit suicide. I think sometimes, and sometimes when we see persons barricaded in their homes and things like that, they will commit suicide on their own, or I think they'll try to entice officers to do that.
Each incident draws a different thought process for me, depending on what's actually been shown at that point in time. I'm always a big buff for information, but I'm kind of like Lieutenant Williams. I'm looking at tactics. Okay, I'm looking at tactics, because bad tactics by a police officer will put them in a position to where somebody might make a bad decision. One of those would be, in my mind, is the incident with the Rice child, that shooting in Cleveland, I believe it was, where, and I looked at that, and that one bothered me the most when the 12-year-old was shot. Seeing how, because I can't count the times that I've dealt with a 12 or 13-year-old with a gun. Can't count the times. Off the top of my head, I think maybe 6 or 7 times where we've responded to where someone has called and said, hey, there's a kid out here with a gun. And we get out there, and from a distance, we ask him to put the gun down. And he's like, it's just a BB gun. Well, we found that information out because we took the time to gather a little intelligence, make sure no one else was around, keeping other people. I mean, it's tactics. Some of the things, like Captain Whittler said, can't be avoided. Guy jumps out of the car and he starts shooting at the police officer. You're responding. But a lot of the situations that I've seen in the videos go from bad tactics, and as Lieutenant Williams said, experience from the officer. So that's what I look at.
What should and what can be done to avert these shootings? It sounds like good training is very important, but you can't train hoodlums, someone who want to create chaos, someone who is mental or on drugs. Only thing you can do is train your officers how to deal with that, I guess.
I think one of the things that the public misses, and that we don't do a good enough job getting out there as law enforcement, and nor does the media, is there are some people there's a faction of our society that just wants to live in total chaos, lawlessness. There are several neighborhoods that I know of that I've lived in before that believe in total lawlessness, and the street law is law. There are people who want to die today, who make up in their mind to say, you know what, I'm going to die today, and that's just it. And if a police officer just happens to show up, I'm going to take him with me. If you have a scanner, listen to the scanner of a radio traffic between the highway patrol and us, and you'll hear those kind of calls come out daily, to where someone says, put an attempt to locate out on someone, he's suicidal, wants to die, suicide by cop, and things like that. That's what we deal with every day. Every day.
Yeah, you know, and when we ask the question, how can we stop these shootings? You know, it's a universal question right now. How can we stop these shootings in St. Louis, Kansas City, and the metropolitan areas around the country? You have, you know, mostly poor neighborhoods where there's a lot of drugs and a lot of crime, and life is of very little value. It just doesn't seem right when we read about 3 shootings overnight on Friday night in St. Louis, 4 dead, or week after week we read about these kinds of things. And as a state highway patrol officer, we're patrolling all over the state, so we're trying to focus on how we can, you know, address these tragedies that happen again and again and again. And we feel like the way to address it is, you know, by being present in those neighborhoods. And while we're going to talk further on recruiting, you know, that whole idea of the best solution to those problems is probably going to come from those neighborhoods. And that's why, we're so interested in having officers on our force who can relate with those communities and tell us what's the best approach to address this with Mr. and Mrs. Smith or whomever who lives in that neighborhood and solve these things. But yeah, we do think that drugs and these crimes go together. So if you're going to solve the gun crimes, then you have to look at the drugs.
I think one of the things that you should put in, I totally agree with both of them, but one of the things that people often overlook is the home life. I think if we have a strong, solid base at home, strong, solid base in our schools, that helps the people that we deal with. Because what we have found is we're dealing with people who have no structure at home, and their first interaction with discipline comes with us. And when we're the first form of discipline, it's often seen in a total chaotic situation. And when we get to the point where we have people calling law enforcement to make someone go to school, and that child doesn't want to get out of bed and go to school, and they call the police or they call the sheriff to come and make little Johnny go to school, the discipline's on us, and we're raising too many people when we should be helping people.
That's true.
Why do you think that a large percentage of blacks are suspicious and apprehensive of law enforcement officers, more so than the majority community?
I think for me it goes back to what I talked about originally, our history. I mean, we're fighting against, law enforcement is fighting against years, decades of where the police was seen as an arm of the government to enforce laws that weren't fair for African Americans. And so my grandparents' stories that they told me growing up is going to be different from my white counterparts' stories that they were told. I was raised, don't talk to the police. If the police want to come talk to you, tell them to come talk to me, because of all the stories of police putting rapes and theft and stealing on young African Americans back in those days, especially extremely down south. Who was covering that? The media. You can go back and look at all the media coverage and all the videos and things that happened back in the 50s and 60s, and you'll see dogs biting African Americans. You'll see the police letting our white counterparts jump on, and they just stand there and not do anything at peaceful protests and things like that. So I believe a lot of that, and this is my personal opinion, I believe a lot of that stems from just our history that continues to be told. We're not that far removed from those times. There are people.
Someone that is doing all the things that need to be done, it is often hard to move that person because are you going to be able to fill that position later? Not speaking for the chief by any means, but I will tell you that I have seen, we have created people who are very good at what they do. And sometimes it's hard to pull them out of positions that get results. Yeah. Sometimes you get punished because you are good at what you do and how you do it. A lot of it has to do with how we communicate and how we can fit into a certain position. And I don't know that you're ever going to get an administrator to say, I didn't promote you because I wanted to keep you where you were. But at the same time, when you know what's going on and you see the value that that employee has, you sometimes don't want to lose that employee because you can count on someone to do their job. Yeah. Part of being a supervisor is being able to let people do their job and having the confidence to know they're going to do it.
Right.
And sometimes that may backfire.
So it's one of the things I heard here is that performance education and training is important, but attitude
Yes.
Right.
plays a major role.
Absolutely.
Big role.
How do you how do you tell a recruit that he can have everything else, but
I don't think you tell them. I think you show them.
Yeah.
I think you show them.
Just about saying.
You have to be able to, part of the recruitment is, and we rely on Lincoln University for a lot. We get a lot of our interns from Lincoln University. Several of them have gone on to become police officers for our department. And what I will tell you is, part of that is showing them how you do things, whether it's from a minority aspect or not. We have a lot of situations where we have people coming, as the capital city, we have a lot of people coming from outside, and we literally open door policy. You know, if you want to know how Jefferson City Police Department does something, come and ask. Our Citizens Police Academy, we do that for not just someone we want to hire, but for our community, because we want them to know. One of the favorite calls that I get as a supervisor is, why was there 5 police cars at that traffic stop? And the first thing you have to explain to someone is, was it really 5, or was it 2 officers, a supervisor, and then was there another agency there? Because we don't leave ourselves on the side of the road. If I'm driving down Highway 50 and there's a highway patrol officer on the side of the road, I don't drive by and hope he's okay. So I may pull over, and you get to a situation where now there's a lieutenant on a traffic stop. There's officers coming to see what the boss is doing. A sergeant's going to come because he doesn't want the lieutenant there. So you may wind up with 4 or 5 cars, one of each, and 2 officers that are really doing the work. You have to explain that to people, and sometimes that goes into this is how we do business.
okay, all righty. Well, thank you all very much for sharing. You have shared your joys of being in law enforcement and some of your fears of being in law enforcement. And you can't do that job without having both. We thank you for tuning in. We, as I indicated in our opening, blacks in law enforcement is a very important responsibility. Sometimes you see departments where there is not very many. You've heard some of the reasons why there may not be as many blacks or other minorities in law enforcement as you would like. But the challenge is help recruit. That's on you. Help recruit. And then you can say, I sent him there. We'll see you next time. God bless.